Crime and murder and arson and all of that. They're all disturbing enough to watch, but there seems to be something particularly disturbing about watching children commit these kind of crimes. There's something fundamentally wrong with it. There's a sort of a blankness. Maybe it's got to do with the fact that that kind of hostility and cruelty and vindictiveness and spitefulness, when you think about it in children, it's like there's no reason behind it. There's no motive behind it. They're just bad eggs. And there's something really wrong with watching kids taking pleasure in pulling the wings off of flies off or tying tin cans to the tails of cats or worse. There's just something genuinely wrong about watching cruel and spiteful children. There's just, I don't know. Maybe it's, like I said, it's the lack of any kind of sense of judgment, or maybe it's the lack of any kind of sense of motive or reason or anything. They're just hate for the sake of hate, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And this is the inescapable conclusion I come to again and again and again as I watch this travesty of this so-called second impeachment hearing unfolding. To me, it's like watching a gang of street toughs try to burn a mouse with a cigarette butt, or pour gasoline on a cat and light it on fire. It's just maliciousness for the sake of maliciousness, with nothing redeeming about it whatsoever. Now, there have been some speculation about there being some kind of a higher reason for this. I don't particularly buy it, but if I had to guess why they're going through with this horrendous, divisive, unity, this just it's almost inconceivable for me that I'm even watching this happen. That articles of impeachment, which were brought within hours of an event that didn't happen, are now being continually brought up and dragged on, and it looks like this farce is going to get started, and you try to find some reason for it other than the sheer cruelty and spitefulness of it, and I can't come up with anything. I think it's just plain national, spiteful conniption fit on the part of the leaders of a party whose attitude we saw when Nancy Pelosi tore up the speech of the President of the United States at the end of his address to Congress in the State of the Union. That was the most petulant, childish thing I've ever seen. That kind of behavior should have been enough to remove Nancy Pelosi from office. There are days, folks, when I just come in and I just don't know what to say. I really just don't know what to say. But this, to me, is beyond any kind of political sense. This, to me, is the mindless cruelty of children, of emotionally vacant, utterly irrational, mean-spirited, nasty little brats. Tim Kaine, who you may remember from the Hillary Clinton campaign, he was, in fact, her running mate. Not many people remember that. I have a hard time recalling it because of his incredible forceful presence and dynamic personality. But Tim Kaine mentioned a concern that he and other Democrats have concerning this second impeachment trial, so-called. I saw the headline, and for a minute I thought, is there possible a moment of sanity? Is this a glimmer of adult thinking, of some kind of sense of higher calling, some kind of duty to the republic, some kind of understanding that whatever number of votes Joe Biden got, there's no question that Donald Trump got 75 million people to vote for him or something. That's more than Barack Obama had, and on and on and on. And so I'm thinking, so Tim Kaine is expressing some concerns. Maybe this is a shred of civility and decency, and that's the word I'm looking for, responsibility, some form of responsibility, some form of adult responsibility. Is that what we're seeing? Well, why don't we just check the article and find out what Tim Kaine's concerns are about this so-called second impeachment trial. This is coming to us from Town Hall Magazine. The headline is, "What Tim Kaine is Very Worried About in the Impeachment Trial." Tim Kaine scrapped his plans to file a motion to censure former President Donald Trump because he couldn't get enough support from either side of the aisle. Oh, okay, good. That means that people are coming to their senses, that somehow this rancor and this insanity maybe is abating now. Good. Let's just read on for a minute, shall we? "We don't have enough support on the Republican side because they don't want to bar Trump from running from office, and I don't have enough support on the Democratic side because for most of my colleagues, it's impeachment or nothing." So, there it is. He said so openly. The Republicans don't want it because they don't want to bar Trump from running for office again, and the Democrats don't want to take censure, which is I had my mouth open to say that that's serious, but how can censure be serious anymore when impeachment is simply thrown around like confetti, like party favors, handed out like the kind of bowl of impeachment that you might leave out to a handful of cruel and spiteful children on trick or treat, let's say. Here, take one each. They scoop up the whole bundle and put it in their bags and off they go. So the rest of the Democrats don't want censure. That's why he decided not to go on with his move to censure the president. He didn't do it out of respect for the fact that 75 million people voted for him, half the country voted for him. He didn't do it out of a sense of unity. He didn't do any of this. He did it because his Democratic colleagues are determined to have impeachment again, and so on. So there we go. Let's see if there's anything else to glean from this magical piece of stateliness and decorum in the greatest republic in the history of the world. Kaine also opened up about his concerns with an impeachment trial, telling reporters he's, quote, "very worried about going through this trial and having the punchline at the end of it, Trump acquitted again." Perfect. You know, a lot of times people will say things, and I'm quite sure that Tim Kaine had no conscious realization of what he was basically admitting there when he says that, we got to be careful because if we do go through with this second impeachment trial, the punchline might be that Trump is acquitted again. And I think that's perfect. Not that the verdict will be, not that the outcome will be, not that the result will be that Trump may be acquitted again. The punchline would be that Trump is acquitted again. You know what a punchline is? It's the conclusion of a joke. That's what a punchline is. Punchline is how you end a joke. And that's what this is. It's a sick, sad, cruel, practical joke committed by cruel and spiteful children for their own personal ego, and furthermore, to make it clear to the people who voted for Donald Trump that your opinions and your amazing ability to get out of line on the 2016 election will not be tolerated again. We will show you that we will not only not tolerate this again, we'll show you that we're going to criminalize the person who you voted for in 2020, and we are going to make that an admonition to the rest of you that we're going to start criminalizing you as well. So there's that. Now let's talk about this actual charge for a minute. And for that, we have to go to her August Majesty, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives, which traditionally has been a role reserved for the most astute politician, generally the most adult politician. Presumably the role of the Speaker of the House of Representatives is to be the primary voice of the actual people. The House is turned over every 2 years, unlike the presidency, and whoever is Speaker of the House, you could make a fairly convincing case, is the person most close to the will of the people, and the majority of the will of the people is expressed in the House of Representatives, and so is the voice of the American people. So Nancy Pelosi, the voice of the heartland, a woman with a $15,000 refrigerator filled with $60 pints of ice cream, whose failing mental abilities are balanced by her increasing personal rancor and just plain insanity. Nancy Pelosi has described Donald Trump's speech on November 6th, and this is the language that she used. On Tuesday, the House impeachment managers who will prosecute former President Donald Trump released their written brief on the case. In the brief, the House managers alleged that Trump, quote, summoned a mob to Washington, exhorted them into a frenzy, and aimed them like a loaded cannon down Pennsylvania Avenue. Trump's conduct endangered the life of every single member of Congress, jeopardized the peaceful transition of power and line of succession, and compromised our national security, the Democrats wrote in the brief. This is precisely the sort of constitutional offense that warrants disqualification from federal office. So, now you understand what this is all about. These people fear Donald Trump, and that is what they think. But what they actually fear is much, much deeper than that. What these children fear is they fear the American people expressing their will again. And that's why big tech does what it does, and that's why the news media does what it does. That's why electronic voting machines do what they do. All of these things in place. Things that I at one time in my youth thought were the guarantors of democracy, that the news media was there to guarantee democracy by rooting out corruption. Now we find out that the news media is there to cover up stories that may hurt the chances of re-election or election of the people who they favor politically. I used to think that the internet, being a source of information, was something that would allow the American people or people around the world to communicate freely and bypass the already corrupted mainstream media. But now with the tech giants on board, we find that any kind of political groups in favor of Donald Trump are simply removed from Facebook. And when I say in favor of Donald Trump, I mean in favor of the American people governing themselves, because that's what it comes down to. And finally, I still thought that it was possible for the American people in numbers to simply go into office and vote the way they wanted to anyway. And I was and remain convinced that that's no longer the case, at least in the states that have these kind of suspect voting laws, and the sheer coincidence of the 5 or 6 battleground states all basically ceasing counting. There's no kind of evidence there whatsoever. I used to believe in all those things, don't believe in any of them anymore. And I'd like to just for a moment deal with the rhetoric of what these charges contain. President Trump summoned a mob to Washington. He summoned a mob to Washington. I know a lot of people who went to Washington, and I don't think any of them were part of a mob. And I know they weren't summoned. They were angry, and they had a right to be angry. And rather than the country dealing with these serious allegations that affect 50% of the people in the country believe that that election was fraudulent or at very least suspicious. And instead of the Supreme Court dealing with the issue and looking into it the way a responsible government would, or instead of the Democrats providing a case-by-case-by-case rebuttal of the entire thing showing how the whole thing is fiction, no. Neither of those things happened. They basically stole the election from the eyes of the American people, or at the very, very, very least, held an election that had such extraordinary eccentricities and inexplicable events and shady optics. This is the best case scenario. That in spite of all of that, they simply put up the concertina wire, called in the National Guard, and said that no, there's nothing to see here. There's no debate at all. Most transparent election in American history. Okay, so they're wondering why the mob was summoned by Donald Trump. Donald Trump didn't summon the mob. The mob was there. It wasn't a mob. It was a group of angry people who felt that the fundamental aspect of self-governance had been denied them, the ability to determine who was going to make laws over their lives. Those people were there in Washington. I'll be willing to bet you that the vast majority of them were there for the first time ever in Washington, unlike the perpetual mobs that are summoned on a weekly or monthly basis by the left. But put all that aside. Summon the mob. And then they go on to say that he incited them into a frenzy, citing the fact that some of these people, whose provenance we don't know. We don't know really exactly who these people were. There's all kinds of things that have come out since this happened, all kinds of things that are about as suspicious as the election in the first place. But again, put all that aside. Summoned the mob and then incited them to a frenzy. Go in there and kill them. Is that what he said? Storm the Capitol. Did he say that? Did he say anything remotely like that? Because I've looked at the transcripts and he didn't say anything even close to that. He said what many people believe, that he thought the election was being stolen. And if the Democrats had really felt that he was wrong, then they would have presented a rebuttal to those claims, but they never did. They simply assured us that the Associated Press has declared that Joe Biden is the president-elect and expected us to take it, because that's what we do, we take it. So there's that charge. And then aimed it at like a cannon down Pennsylvania Avenue. Assume that these charges for a second were true. What would that have looked like? That's how I always deal with bad ideas and conspiracy theories. I say grant the premise. So let's grant the premise of this so-called impeachment articles. The president summoned a mob, okay? That means the president says, I want every single supporter of mine to come to Washington and come armed. Inciting them to a frenzy is to point at the Capitol building and say, you see those criminals down there? Those criminals stole your vote, and they are determined to destroy you. And the only way that we can preserve this republic is for us to storm that building, kill or remove them by force, and put an end to this illegal treasonous activity. And then firing at a cannon down Pennsylvania Avenue is my favorite part of this way of thinking about this, because, frankly, if these things had happened and a genuine call to arms had been issued and a genuine reason for grievances and assault of the Capitol had been given to the American people by the president, if any of this had been real, then they would still be in the Capitol building. That's the kind of insurrection that is possible in this country. Not a few people dressed like Vikings sitting in chairs, people, again, whose provenance and background completely unknown and no one's interested in. Threatening the lives of the members of Congress? Well, near as I can tell, the only life that I saw threatened was a woman who was there protesting who got shot at point blank range from behind a barricade. And they will continue to use this again and again and again and again and again. If I had to guess, I would say that this impeachment sham is going to go forward in a couple days. I would suspect that they will not get the 17 Republicans that they need for a 2/3 majority, or whatever the case may be, for this actual impeachment to take place in the Senate. I believe that the punchline will be that Donald Trump is acquitted again. And I finally believe, more than anything else, that this is the kind of unforgettable insult. I can't tell you how many times I have seen a team in winning a hard-fought game spiking the ball, basically, metaphorically, pissing on the other team's logo on the field, running their flags around the other team's stadium, taunting the fans, all of it. I've seen this quite a few times. And what I've noticed the result of that is that the fans who have been thus insulted don't forget it. When that kind of spiteful cruelty, that kind of childishness on the part of the enemy team is made manifest, the people who have to suffer that indignity don't forget it. And history is filled with case after case after case of beaten armies, defeated armies, brooding on this insult, and then coming back and utterly devastating, demolishing, and destroying the people that leveled that insult on them when the time was to be magnanimous. And that, of all of this, is the thing that I find most disgusting, is the un-Americanness of it. After the American Revolution, there was no political witch hunts. There were no hangings of Tories, of loyalists to the king. After the American Civil War, there was no prosecution or execution of the enemy leaders. The guy who was in charge of the Andersonville prison camp was hanged. He was the only person who ever suffered any kind of punishment as a result of this national rebellion, this enormous civil war. Greatest catastrophe in our history. And all of the leaders of it went free. The vice president of the Confederacy went back to the United States Congress. That kind of magnanimity that results from having liberated concentration camps in Germany and having seen what the Japanese did to their prisoners in Japan, and raising both of those countries up by the hand and helping them get back on the feet. That kind of magnanimity in victory is what America is all about. That kind of fundamental decency and humility is what America is all about. And watching this travesty is not only childish and cruel and spiteful, it's un-American, it's destroying the country. They know it. And they can't help themselves. And the reason they can't help themselves is the reason that children who have been raised as brats can't help themselves when they're deprived of a toy in a Walmart. That's why they will kick and scream and writhe around on the floor, and you have to grab them by the collar and drag them out to the car, because children are not capable of putting the needs of a greater good ahead of their own personal desires. That's the definition of a child. The reason we don't let children vote is because children are not masters of their emotions. And the reason this country is in the trouble it's in now is because people who are no longer masters of their emotions are now running the country. The children are in charge, and they're not good children. They're not healthy children. They're not kind children. They're not mature children. They're mean-spirited, vindictive, bitter, angry, furious, cruel, spiteful little murderers who are bound and determined to take their vengeance out on whatever has offended them. And as with child soldiers all around the world, they are, in fact, the cruelest and the most despicable form of adversary that you can find. And I suspect that they are not going to get what they want out of this. What they are going to get is a much more energized opposition from a population that is already brutalized and filled with a burning righteous anger. And I think that these idiots are going to pack that gunpowder in even tighter. They're going to bring in even more barrels, and the explosion that is going to come back and bite them is going to be something the likes of which they have not seen. We already have discussed and will continue to discuss how to overcome the unbelievable defensive measures that these criminals have put in place in order to maintain their elitist position over the rest of us. And we will circumvent those obstacles. And when we do, we will not forget this spiking of the ball. We won't forget this taunting. We won't forget this arrogance. We won't forget the showboating. We won't forget this rancid display of venality and pettiness. We will not forget it. And while Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi both seem to have a very difficult time remembering anything, I can assure you they will remember this day, because we are not going to forget it.